Welcome to the second of our Easter reflections in 2021. If you haven't already, can I encourage you to pause the video and to read John chapter 19, verses 16 to 22, before we come together to look at that. Well, as we come to John's account of the crucifixion itself, we see that compared with the other three Gospels, there are a number of differences. John wants to take his own slant on telling us the story of the resurrection. He wants to draw out some key facets that maybe the other Gospels don't do so. And so he focuses on different details. He misses out some of the details in the other Gospels, the mocking of Jesus, the darkness coming over the land, the cry of Jesus on the cross of desolation, my God, why have you forsaken me? The tearing of the temple curtain and the centurion saying, surely this is the Son of God. None of that is in John's account of the crucifixion. And yet he does include other details. In today's passage, the debate over the notice that goes over Jesus' head, the care for Jesus' mother, Jesus' final cry before he dies. And also, as we'll see, there's several fulfillment quotations and actually many allusions to what's going on from the Old Testament to explain what's going on with the cross. John has his own slant. John wants to show us fresh understandings of what the cross means. And in these talks in particular, I want to draw out how the cross is the foundation, the birth points of God's people, the church, the followers of Jesus Christ. And following on from yesterday's talk, I want to start by just pointing out those three headings from yesterday. So first of all, thinking about glory. The cross is a moment of glory. And we see that in the title that Pontius Pilate puts over Jesus' head. It's a title that says that Jesus is the King of the Jews, to show us that he is a king. On the cross, he is pronounced as king, and so that fulfills what we saw yesterday, that when Jesus said, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. It's on the cross that Jesus is declared to be the king. And actually, Pilate, although he puts it up there really out of spite to the Jews, he wants to sort of say, look, I'm not going to say that Jesus claims to be the king of the Jews, I'm going to say he is the king of the Jews. And that's why he's being crucified. This is to be a humiliation for the Jewish people. That's Pilate's motive. And yet, as Jesus has pointed out, Pilate's authority stems from a higher authority. Earlier in the trial, Jesus said, you would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above. And Pilate unwittingly, in putting that notice that Jesus is king, declares what God is saying in the cross. This is a moment of glory. And actually, John points out another detail. The other Gospels have Jesus, King of the Jews, or just King of the Jews. They don't put the whole title there. But John says, it said that Jesus, the Nazarene, King of the Jews. That's what it says in the Greek. In many translations, it takes Nazarene to mean a person from Nazareth. So it says Jesus of Nazareth. But actually, the word Nazarene in Hebrew is linked to the word for root. Sorry, not the word for root, the word for branch. Let's get that right, it's very important. And it may be that John here, in using the words, in pointing out that Pilate used the word Nazarene, is saying that, again, Pilate unwittingly pointed to Jesus being the Son of David, the Messiah that was to come. Referring to a passage in Isaiah which says this, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, that's David's dad. From his roots, a branch will bear fruit. Jesus is king. He's a king that will bear fruit. And as we saw from John chapter 12 in yesterday's talk, Jesus does talk about bearing fruit, but only when he falls to the ground. The cross is a moment of falling as well. This is a real moment of death. This is a real moment of torment for Jesus. We mustn't get away from that. The fact that it happens at the place of the skull maybe emphasizes that this is a moment of death. And yet Jesus says that he falls to the ground in order that many more will find life, and that many others will be born, that there will be fruits from his death. And John points out, as many of the other Gospels, that Jesus is crucified between two others. He dies with criminals. And this may be a reference to Isaiah 53, verse 12, where it says, "He poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors, for he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors." Jesus died for our sins, but he died for the sin of many, that he could bear the fruit and draw many to be his, to become his people, to become his church. The church is those that are sinners, but are saved through the death, Jesus' death on the cross. And actually, as we saw, that comes from John chapter 12. But in John chapter 12, as we saw yesterday, or in the last talk, Jesus also is the one who is not just falls, but is lifted up. On the cross, he was lifted up, and that notice was put above his head. And it was a notice in three languages, in Aramaic, in Latin, and in Greek. And the Aramaic was a language of a local people. Latin was the language of the army, those that were actually crucifying him. And Greek was a language that was recognized throughout the empire. And actually, John and the other Gospels and the New Testament are written in Greek. That sign was put there in many languages. And Jesus has said in John chapter 12 that when he is lifted up from the earth, he will draw all men to myself. This is a point that the many languages show that many people from all different nations can hear that Jesus is king and so come to him. The church, the people that Jesus is creating in his death on the cross, is an international church for all people of different languages. And it's more than just a group of people. Actually, something else is going on here that John wants us to see. This is maybe more subtle. But do you remember back in John chapter 2 that Jesus had said, "Destroy this temple and I will raise it again in 3 days." He was standing in the temple courts in Jerusalem, having cleared out the temple, and they had challenged him about that. And the disciples realized that when he talked about them being destroyed, he was talking about his body. His body on the cross would be destroyed and he would be raised again in 3 days. And yet in a way, this is a theme in John's gospel where John is pointing to the new temple that Jesus is building through his death on the cross. There's a couple of details that John includes here that maybe also point to that. So John says that, like the other Gospels, tells us that Jesus carried the cross to Golgotha. But the other Gospels mention that someone else helped him, Simon of Cyrene, had to help him carry the cross. John misses that out. He wants us to focus on the fact that Jesus is carrying the cross to Golgotha. And it could be that John is referring back to a story in Genesis chapter 22, when God commanded Abraham to go take his son Isaac and sacrifice him on Mount Moriah. And as Isaac was taken to the mountain, he carried the wood. I mean, the story doesn't end there. God, of course, doesn't want Isaac to be sacrificed. And before Abraham is able to sacrifice his son, God tells him to stop. And in place of Isaac, a ram is sacrificed. And yet Mount Moriah, where that happened, was understood to be the place where the temple would eventually be built. And as Jesus carries the cross to Golgotha, as he carries the woods to the place where he is going to build a new temple through the cross, through his death. And do you remember that John points out that on the notice it said Jesus the Nazarene? And Nazarene means roots. Sorry, I keep getting it wrong. It means branch. And in the first century, the Qumran community and other communities associated the branch of Isaiah with another branch mentioned in the Old Testament, mentioned in the book of Zechariah. And it says this, referring to the high priest at the time. Zechariah is about building a temple. It says, "Here is the man whose name is the branch. And he will branch out from this place and build the temple of the Lord. It is he who will build the temple of the Lord, and he will be clothed with majesty and will sit and rule on his throne." You see that hint of glory again? The cross is a moment of glory, but the cross is also the place where Jesus, as the Nazarene, as the branch, is building his temple. Not a temple of stones like a temple in Jerusalem, but a temple of people. Those that have their sins forgiven and become the many that the one seed that Jesus fell to the ground to create was. Those that are drawn from all nations to be his. Together they create a new temple. A temple not of stone or limited to one place, but a temple where people throughout the world can meet the God of Jesus Christ. That temple is the community of believers. The new temple to replace the one in Jerusalem. The cross is the foundation, the cornerstone of God's people, the temple, the church. You see the cross as central to that. Well, like yesterday's talk, there are some questions for you to help you reflect on what we've been thinking about in this passage. Do pause the video and spend some time reflecting on these words.